Bruins Beat is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And we're here with Conor Ryan. Conor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. I apologize. My voice is still gone. I lost it. So I'm still kind of struggling to get back to normal, but hopefully it's not too bad to listen to. I want to start here, Conor. Another big disappointment for Boston sports fans on Monday night. Big disappointment. Came back from 3-0 just to get crushed in Game 7, a complete no-show. And I hate to loop the Bruins into this because we've talked a lot about the Bruins' disappointments and what happened this spring. And I even tweeted about the 2019 Cup final, how Monday night, was basically sort of just the 2019 Cup final Game 7 all over again, which again, don't like talking about it. I don't like twisting the knife. There's no fun in it for me. But this season, let's look at this season. What was the bigger disappointment? The Celtics performance against the Heat or the Bruins against the Panthers in that series? Because I think there's a clear answer. I know the wound is fresh, but it's the Bruins. To me, it's the Bruins. I mean, the Celtics, horrible performance, but the expectations were higher for the Bruins. They were supposed to go deeper than just round one. And I don't mean to pile on about this, but I think you're going to see a lot of people comparing them. I think the Bruins are worse. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the Celtics got further, obviously, and it stinks that, you're fighting against history and you get to this point where you're a win away from the NBA Finals, almost complete, the fabled, 3-0 comeback to come back and beat the Heat. Team that, again, you should have beat, which, there's so many things you can factor into that makes it such a disappointing result for the Celtics. But I think at the end of the day, you look at the stakes involved. And again, remains to be seen what happens to the Celtics this offseason. The team could look very different. But if you look at it, right, Jason Tatum's 25, Jaylen Brown's 26. You've got, other pieces around them. Again, remains to be seen what they do. They probably have to make some moves. But you look at that core, they're at least, even if they do nothing, they're still going to contend for the next couple of years. Is it enough to get them over the top? Remains to be seen. But they are in a spot that I think 95% of NBA teams wish that they had in terms of what they can provide, what they can bring, and what that young core is for them. Bruins don't have that same luxury, right? And again, we've talked about their core, and they've got guys like Pasternak and McAvoy and Lindholm and Swayman if he signs a new deal and what have you. Like, they're in a pretty solid spot as well. But you look at this past year and what was up for grabs. Celtics didn't have a last dance kind of thing for it. It was kind of unfinished business. You get to the NBA Finals. You come up short, but you still had a good core that's going to build, hopefully, for the future. Bruins just felt like there was their best chance. And again, we talked about it. We still think they're going to be competitive. They'll still, retool some things around and still be a very good team. But this was the shot. And to have it end not like in a hard-fought, back and forth Eastern Conference final or what have you, where, sometimes you can just shrug your shoulders to that's hockey. To, again, lose to a team like Florida that, again, has gone to the Stanley Cup final now, but still, you look at just where you had that team in multiple games. It's a tough hit.
Really tough hit. That's why I think the Bruins are worse. And I get it. Celtics fans are going to say what the Celtics did is worse, and they were, a tease all season. But man, that Bruins team out in the first. I mean, I keep watching. They shouldn't be out. They should not have been out nearly as early as they were. And that's why I think the bigger disappointment was the Bruins season, because it just shouldn't have ended when it did. And I know the Panthers have went on to now the Stanley Cup final, where they'll play Bruce Cassidy and the Vegas Golden Knights, which should be an interesting series. Should be a very interesting series. TNT certainly getting a lot out of Matthew Tkachuk. But at the same time, you look at all the chances the Bruins had to close that series out. I mean, all the chances. Game 5, Game 6. You have those leads in the third period. Game 7, you're up 1 with a minute to go. And I just keep going back to that. And it's like, there's, to me, what the Bruins did was worse. Now, if you want to say like, oh, from a historical perspective and a height perspective, I mean, I don't think, going into game 7 of the Bruins series with the Panthers, people were not super high on the Bruins, given how bad they'd played, how much they'd choked in games 5 and 6. It was a different story with the Celtics. I mean, you have the 2004 Red Sox getting rolled out. You have every Boston sports star in attendance at the Garden. I mean, you were there. I saw your tweet. It was loud as hell in that building. Like, it was as hyped an event as we've had in the city since probably the 2019 Cup final. Or honestly, even last year as well. But I mean, game 7, like a 1-game thing, like game 7 of that Cup final. I know the Celtics were in it last year, but, there wasn't a do or die game that the Celtics could have won the whole thing in. But again, just colossal disappointment by the Celtics. And now playoffs, reason to care about the playoffs are done in Boston. That's it. Got the Red Sox now. Yippee. Got the Boston Red Sox to watch. So lucky us. But the big topics I want to get into today are sort of the big contracts the Bruins might have to dole out this offseason. And I want to start here because we've talked a lot about the goaltending and Linus Ullmark and what they must do with trades and such. But one thing we have not touched on, and again, we'll touch on this a lot during the offseason, Jeremy Swayman's contract. He's an RFA, right? Due money. I was looking around at comparables. Jake Ottinger, who's, also terrific young goalie, fell just short this year. Same type of deal, got 3 years, $4 million. Spencer Knight got 3 years, $4.5 million. And Carter Hart recently on a similar deal got 3 years, $3.97 million. Now, there's a website called Dober Hockey. I don't know a ton about it, but they projected a bunch of contracts and they're just projections. So who knows? But he has Swayman coming in at $4.54 million, which is a hefty sum. And I also think when you look at those comparable deals, that's why I don't think there's any chance. I think I saw some people say, oh, Swayman should get somewhere around like 2.5, $3 million. He's not getting that. The comparable contracts are too high. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think for any situation in which he's going to sign for like below, I don't know, 3.75, if that, it's got to be a situation where you have to convince him to take like a Kevin LeBanc deal, right? Which, if you want to pitch Swayman in terms of like run a cap crunch this year, want to keep the Haggs rolling with you and Ullmark, we're probably going to have to make a move like that, right? In terms of you have to sacrifice for another year, maybe hold off getting your payday for another year or two and go from there. And maybe there's the buy-in from the player, right? Like we've seen a guy like Kevin LeBanc do it. I don't think his agent would be thrilled about that. And probably,
No.
like, again, as much as I think you look at, as much as you look at guys like Bergeron and Krejci, who are at the end of their careers taking very, cheap deals and the greater good of the team, it's still like, any player can do what they want. You still, like, for a player like Swayman, who's kind of answered the call whenever he's been called upon as a young, promising goalie, to, have him be the guy that he has to take that kind of deal. Again, it's his prerogative. He can do what he wants, but I think you look at just reading the market and you look at what guys like Spencer Knight and Jake Ottinger and these guys that are signing these kind of 2-3 year bridge contracts. Swayman, you look at the numbers, falls right in line with that, right? Like that's why I think sometimes people talk about if they move a guy like Ullmark, they're probably comfortable with Swayman because he has all the makings of a number one goalie in this league. So, yeah, I find, Bruins fans probably want it to be a very, super cheap deal for another year or two. And, maybe it's part of the same thing with like, all right, we're on a cap crunch this year. If the cap jumps up next year, let's just tread water this year, whether that's getting Bergeron back for cheap, whether it's signing a guy like Swayman really cheap. Just survive in advance, keep a competitive team in place, and then you can really retool in 24 when there's more cap available. But it's one thing to kind of pitch that. And it's another thing for a player to actually go and sign that. Because, again, it's up to the player themselves if they want to take that risk. Because also, let's look at it, right? Like, it's not like if Swayman signs for, hell, I don't know, 1.5 million on a 1 year deal, like a LeBanc contract, and then he has a bad year, which it's goaltending. There's a lot of variance. It's not like the Bruins are going to be like, well, don't worry, we said we're going to sign you for 4.5, so here it is. Like, not how sports and business kind of works, right, Evan?
No, you're 100% right. That's exactly it. I mean, goaltending, you see even a guy like Carter Hart, the value goes up and down each year. It's not, you're not a position player. He's also younger. When Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci took their team-friendly contracts last year, they were older. Like, that was just kind of stick around. They've gotten paid. Jeremy Swayman has not gotten paid yet. And this is a number one goalie in the NHL. So he deserves the money. He should get the money. And if he's smart, he'll, take it for what he's worth. Now, is he worth more than Ottinger, Knight, and Hart? I don't know. I mean, Knight's the top one of that group. Ottinger, to me, is the best of the three. Knight was the top contract of the three I listed. Ottinger, to me, is the best. So, yeah, I mean, I think he should come in around 4. I think that is the proper value. And with the cap going up, hopefully in future years, you can make that work. He also deserves it. Now, do you want to sign him to a super long-term deal? 6 or 8 years or something? I don't know about that, but I mean, you maybe it's like a Tage Thompson situation where you're saving money down the road by, getting into a contract that's more expensive now. But with your cap situation, how are you doing that? Like, you really can't do that either. And I still think, even if, let's say Swayman does come in at 4.5 million, which is what, the projection I gave you, right? Let's say that happens. You probably still have to deal Ullmark, right? Yeah. I mean, like, so that's the other thing is, like, that's why, maybe the Bruins will say, hey, they'll try to pitch him as you can keep Ullmark around, but I think he needs to get paid. Do you agree that, like, if he does get what he's projected to get, Ullmark kind of does have to go?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you find yourself in the same situation where you're committing more money to, again, an area of strength, but what happens when you get to the playoffs? Are you going to commit to what you should have done this year and keep that goalie rotation in place? Or are you going to panic and run with one guy, and then you've got either 5 million or 4.5, 3.75 million sitting on the bench every single game, right? Like, it's one of those things where I think you look at areas of this team to subtract from just to become cap compliant. Goaltending's probably got to be one of them, right? In terms of you're shelling out that amount of money when you get to the playoffs. You can't play both of them in one game, but again, if the Bruins roll out the same goalie rotation in the playoffs that they used in the regular season this past year when they won 65 games, maybe it's worth it, but you got to stick to it. And what happens when you're in the playoffs? You stick to it this time around, Montgomery, and all of a sudden Ullmark has, a bad game, and then Swayman has a bad game. And it's like, who do you go to next? You go into the same kind of panic situation. It's not to say that every team should only have one goal and you ride them into the dust, but it's a balancing act, right? I think you have to have a number one and a very solid backup and run through the whole season and see what puts you in the best spot to succeed. But allocating 9 million, 9.5 million to a position like that, where again, you can only get so much out of that unit when they get to the playoffs, runs a whole lot of risk. When you look at just where else this team can subtract from, and there's not really a lot you can, right? If you want to subtract from the forward core, you're giving up probably a good player. You're moving useful assets for at least a couple of them on defense, if that has to be the case. When you look at the goaltending situation, that's an area that just makes sense in terms of removing a talented player, getting something in return, and most importantly right now, bringing up cap space.
Yeah, I mean, again, it kind of hits back to this year was the perfect storm of Swayman was making very little money, so you didn't allocate much towards 2 starting goalies in the NHL. Now you probably don't have that luxury anymore. Connor, I want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs. I know the Celtics may be out of it, but right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And to be honest, that's why I love FanDuel. The promotions, outstanding. The safety and security of the app, elite. The ability for me to get paid instantly, amazing. It's a terrific experience to bet with FanDuel because of how easy to use the app is. And I know the Celtics are out, Connor. I know the Celtics are out. But you want to keep the NBA Finals interesting. You have a strong feeling towards the Heat. The Nuggets, I know the Nuggets have opened as wide favorites. Maybe you think, hey, you know what? The Heat are going to do it again. Well, you could win yourself a lot of money if that comes true. There's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/Boston and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/Boston. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Please bet responsibly. So, Connor, diving right back in, we've discussed Swayman. I want to get to the 2 big UFAs, and we've both given our cases for keeping both and letting both go, but projections are interesting. So Tyler Bertuzzi, we'll start there. Most Bruins fans feel it's imperative that the Bruins keep him around, find a way to keep him. Probably better value than Taylor Hall. He's younger. He's only 28, and kind of fits this lineup maybe a little bit better at the current moment. So two projections from one is from AFP Analytics. Daily Faceoff used this one, and theirs. They gave Bertuzzi 6 years at $5.25 million, and then that same Dober hockey projection had him at $4.283 million. I think they are both are wildly undervaluing Tyler Bertuzzi, but on the flip side, are we overvaluing him? I don't think we are. I think you saw his value in the playoffs. I think you saw it down the stretch. I think he'll get more than that. I think 6 years is probably spot on. Brings him up to 34, 35 years old. That makes sense. But $4.283 million, that's barely more than what he's making now. I completely disagree with that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it also depends on how you're reading the market, right? I think it's the most important thing where, sure, you look at the positives, right? Great net front guy, has scored 30 goals. If he's healthy, can probably give you that for another 2-3 years, right? We'll see how he is at age 33, 34. But next couple of years, you're going to get a pretty solid top six, middle six guy that can make an impact, as we saw in his short time with the Bruins. Cons, skating ability, maybe that's something that concerns you about handing him a longer contract. Defensive play, not great. Got to shore that up because that was an obvious flaw with his game. And then probably injury history, right? He's had quite a few in the past. Is that risk? But still, I think when you look at 30 goal scorer, 28, had a fantastic playoff run, and you look at the state of this free agent market of who's available, I think some team's going to give him $6 million. Like, again, what the Bruins would love if you stayed at 4.2, then all of a sudden you can move a contract or two without uprooting 3 or 4 contracts, right? Like, it becomes a little bit more palatable if you're all of a sudden saving an extra 2.5 off of what you thought you were going to give this guy. Then maybe at the very least it becomes more feasible if you're the Bruins, right? But I just don't see that happening. I don't see him signing for anything under 6, maybe 5.75. But I just think you look at how many desperate teams there are that want a guy like Bertuzzi, and he kind of fits that mold as to how I think the teams are evaluating what matters in the playoffs, especially, as much as you look at, these big bodied guys, or, people are going after guys like Nick Ritchie less and less. And it's these gritty net front guys that have skill like Bertuzzi that are making a difference, I think, in a lot of these playoff games.
They are. And again, I think he also carries value for you. He's a playoff X factor. We've seen that in this postseason, and you nailed it with the market. Do you know who the 2 free agents are that are probably going to get the most money? Bertuzzi and Orlov.
Yep.
Like, you have both. You had them both. Crazy, but it also goes to show you that the market's thin. Patrick Kane, Ryan O'Reilly, these guys are not going to get a lot of money. And they're bigger names because of their past. But we see it every year, Connor. We always look at free agency. We kind of laugh because teams will make, like the Red Wings last year, they'll make all these big splashes. And it's like, well, what does it really do? Free agency is so well documented that you don't build your team through that. You can add supplemental pieces. You can go, Bertuzzi's a good example. Good top 6 guy, But to the days of getting Mark Savard and Zdeno Chara, 2 franchise pillars at the free agency day, are kind of gone. That doesn't really happen much anymore. So yeah, I mean, again, maybe we're undervaluing him, but I again, given the market, given his abilities, given the way he plays being something the teams want, especially in the postseason, especially with I'm not saying he's Matthew Tkachuk. Tkachuk's better, but similar kind of gritty style in the net front and such. Teams might want that, and they're going to overpay for it. The next one, obviously, is Dmitry Orlov. Dmitry Orlov, 31 years old. AFP Analytics had him at 5 years, $6.25 million. Dober Hockey had him at $5.262 million. I think he comes in over 6. I think this is why the Bruins should kind of steer clear, especially considering he's 31. 5-year deal would take him to, 36, 37. You have enough money tied up in the back end. But I do think he ultimately gets over 6 because, as we've said, someone's going to value him as a top 4 defenseman.
Yeah, I think you look at the state of the market and what he provided, and I think it probably even surprised a lot of probably teams that are interested in sending a guy like Orlov in terms of how much tangible offensive generation there was. Like, he's a guy that's been productive in his roles previously, but I think he always had the label as a defense first kind of guy. I mean, him and Niskanen teamed up and honestly helped the Capitals win that cup before. They were their shutdown pairing throughout that run there. With Bruins, a little bit more, risk reward. I think he had a couple of plays where like, oh, where are you kind of going, buddy? But you also look at just what he provided offensively, and I think that was a big surprise. Maybe again, that's just part of playing in Montgomery's system or what have you. But I do think it's a situation where you look at just that tangible production guy that's won a cup. There's value there, and he's I think from Orlov's camp, right, this is going to be his last big contract. I think, again, you're right. You're looking at over $6 million for that. And if you're the Bruins, Bertuzzi, it at least somewhat fits into what they're trying to do, right, in terms of, keeping a very solid core in place for the future. Orlov, listen, you sign him for 2-3 years, that's great. But I think when you look at this team and how I think they want to approach this retool of keeping their options open, not running into so many cap crunches moving forward, signing a contract like that to a guy at his age has all the makings of an albatross in 2-3 years where you got to either, try to trade it or what have you. I just don't think you want that on your hands if you're the Bruins, right? You want to keep that flexibility open as you try to really retool this roster on the fly.
Yeah, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't add to the core. I mean, I guess if you felt if this team was missing a top 4 left shot defenseman, if Hampus Lindholm was not on this team, then maybe that's, Orlov is your guy. And if that was the case, plus, you were a younger contending team. Oh, we need kind of a veteran top 4 left shot defenseman. Let's bring in Orlov. This team is not in that position. So again, a good deadline ad, gave you a lot, put up a lot of points in the playoffs for the short time they were in it. As you said, defensive issues for sure. Didn't really ever work with McAvoy well, which was puzzling because I think that was one area where we're like, oh man, imagine Orlov, McAvoy, and Lindholm, Carlo, what a top 4 that would be. And really not, really didn't end up like that. So yeah, I mean, again, we've talked about it a lot so far, but the cap is going to be an issue this offseason. It's going to prevent them from doing stuff. One thing before we go, circling back on Bertuzzi, I keep thinking everyone's kind of high on wanting Bertuzzi to stay and get a solid contract and, move out Taylor Hall to keep Bertuzzi. And I get that. And I'm kind of in that camp. But there's part of me that thinks it wouldn't surprise me if this was like a Matt Bolesky deal where he gave a contract to a guy, a longer one, and just didn't produce the way you wanted him to. Maybe his center isn't great. Maybe it doesn't work. But I feel like Bertuzzi could be different. I feel like Bertuzzi is different because like Bolesky was great because he was with Getzlaf and Perry at the time. Bertuzzi was, produced with Zaka. So to me, like, I don't think that will happen. But there's part of me that's the pessimist in me is always like, this could be a bad contract. But
yeah. You running that risk, right? Again, you look at like the skating ability, injuries, all that stuff. There is like some variance where, I think people think he's going to pick up right where he was in the playoffs or be a 30-goal scorer. Like, he's a very good player, but it's not like a slam dunk kind of deal in that regard, right? So if you're the Bruins, got to weigh your options. At this point, you don't have any margin forever in terms of, anchoring yourself to albatross contracts. Can't do it.
Not a good idea. But you know what is a good idea? I want to check out the work Connor's doing at Boston.com. What can people look forward to from you over there?
Yeah, we're going to have you covered throughout this Bruins offseason, free agency, any trade speculation, draft, dev camp, all that good stuff. So please follow over at Boston.com. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. And remember to go subscribe to New England Hockey Journal. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins Beat listeners, have a great rest of your week.